Welcome to Keswick Vineyards, located on the historic 400-acre Edgewood estate, home to Al and Cindy Schoenberg. The land was part of the original 1727 Nicholas Meriwether Crown grant of 18,000 acres on the east side of the Southwest Mountains. George Barclay Reeves, a direct descendant of the original grantee, built the current residence in 1911. He served in the U.S. embassies in Germany, Austria, and Brazil, negotiated exchanges of prisoners of war during World War I, and was decorated by the French, English, and German governments. The property was the site of two important historical events, one during the Revolutionary War and the other during the Civil War. On June 4, 1781, Jack Jewett rode 40 miles through the night from Cuckoo Tavern in Louisa County to Charlottesville to warn Governor Thomas Jefferson of approaching British troops. British Colonel Banastre Tarleton and his troops arrived at Castle Hill, the original tract of land to which Edgewood Estate belonged, just after dawn. Legend has it that Dr. Thomas Walker, the owner of Castle Hill, convinced Tarleton and his troops to stay for breakfast, thus delaying their march to Charlottesville. The delay allowed Jefferson and the legislature to escape. Almost 100 years later, Edgewood Estate became a stopping point during another American war. Confederate General James A. Longstreet was ordered to move his troops from East Tennessee on April 7, 1864 to Charlottesville to prepare for the Battle of the Wilderness. The Confederates camped at various sites, including Edgewood Estate. Historians believe that just days before moving toward the wilderness, Longstreet's men were reviewed by General Robert E. Lee. Mr. Reeves, the owner of Edgewood during the Civil War, received compensation for damage to his land and trees cut for fuel by the troops. You can see copies of his receipts in the exhibit table. Al and Cindy Schoenberg, current owners of Edgewood, arranged for Civil War historian William Lee to conduct a metal detector search of the cleared land and wooded areas. Some of the Civil War relics found throughout the woods and open land along Louisa Road are in the exhibit table. They include drop bullets, uniform buttons, belt buckles, and discarded camp equipment. In more recent years, Edgewood Estate has been the home of singer-songwriter Art Garfunkel and of movie director Hugh Wilson. Al and Cindy Schoenberg are the current owners of Edgewood. In 2000, the Schoenbergs began turning their dreams into reality. The first step to planting their vineyard was to clear the land. Burn piles were erected. A 10-foot-high fence was installed around the vineyard to protect the grapes from hungry deer. The soil was ripped to allow for better growth of the roots. A shank was pulled 30 inches deep where the rows would be planted. The land was then raked and all the rocks were removed. Once the land has been prepared, the next step is the infrastructure of the vineyard. First, the end posts were installed.
la otra cara, güey. Ay, poquito para abajo.
The Schomburgs chose the California saddle style of end post to create a beautiful effect down the driveway. The Schomburgs wanted to create a stable and consistent environment for the new grapes and installed an irrigation system. A generator is used to run the system. Water is extracted from a pond on the estate. Keswick Vineyards uses a drip line system to water each plant. Support poles and trellis wires were installed. The drip line was attached to the wire. It was now time to plant the vines. First, the vines were dipped into a microbiotic solution so the roots would absorb nutrients better and hold water longer. The planting locations were marked by paint. A hole was then dug by hand. Over 25,000 plants were hand-planted within a couple of weeks. Varietals include Viognier, Chardonnay, Verdeo, Norton, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Merlot, Malbec, Chambourcin, Petit Verdot, and Touriga. Grow tubes covered the plants to protect them. A stake was placed in each tube and then attached to the wire. This provides the support needed for each vine. Now that the 50-acre vineyard was planted, we waited for nature to work its magic. In 2002, Keswick Vineyards had its first harvest. With this first vintage, Keswick Vineyards won over 50 medals, including Best White Wine in the U.S. at the Atlanta International Wine Summit. Harvest begins once the winemaker has determined the grapes have reached the perfect ripeness. The grapes are then hand-picked from the vines. When picked, they are put into small boxes called lugs. The lugs are dumped into larger bins, and the grapes are taken to the winery for processing. Sugar levels are taken using a hydrometer. The large bins are labeled and put into a reefer truck to cool to prevent any rotting. Once cooled, the grapes are sorted by hand. Keswick Vineyards is one of a few wineries that hand sort their grapes. It is a very time-consuming process. It is the Schornberg's goal to make only world-class wines, and they feel this step is crucial to achieve that goal. About 20% of the grapes harvested are discarded through this process. For white grapes, the grapes are either whole bunch pressed directly, or a select few very ripe clusters may be processed like red grapes by crushing, destemming, and soaking on the skins for a little added flavor. Next, the grapes are destemmed. The destemmer removes each grape from the cluster and also splits the skin of the grape to allow the juice to be extracted easily when pressed. The screw rotates the opposite direction of the cage, separating the grapes from the stem. The stems are then discarded. Red and white wines are processed differently. With white wine, the grapes are pressed first, then fermented. The press is like a colander with a balloon inside. As the bladder inflates, it presses the grapes against the small holes in the sides of the steel drum to extract the juices. The bladder then deflates, the drum rotates, and the bladder inflates again. How long this process takes and how much to inflate the bladder is determined by the winemaker. White juice is racked into barrels for fermentation.
Pretty clear, Jake? Yeah, okay.
Keswick Vineyards uses mainly French oak barrels, with a few of American oak sourced from Virginia. Yeast is added. On some selective reserve wines, the winemaker may choose to use the native yeast that exists on the skin of the grapes. Fermenting begins. As the yeast converts the sugars to alcohol, carbon dioxide is released. The bubblers are used to allow the carbon dioxide to escape and to prevent oxygen from entering. With red wine, after destemming, the grapes are fermented first, then pressed. The red must, grapes and juice, is poured into large tanks for fermentation. red wine gets its flavor and color from the juice soaking on the skins. Once fermentation is completed, the skins and wine are removed from the tank and transferred to the press where the last of the wine is extracted. After a few days of settling, the winemaker may choose to rack the wine off the now dead yeast cells known as lees. The wine is then put back into barrels to mature. Chris Schornberg begins to design labels. It usually takes about 3 to 4 months to get a label designed and approved by the TTB, Tax and Trade Bureau of Alcohol. Before bottling, the wine needs to be prepared. This involves both stabilizing and filtering to protect the wine from future spoilage. A bottling truck is brought in. Inside the semi-truck is the entire bottling process. Wine is pumped from the tank to the bottling truck. Bottles are loaded, cleaned, filled, corked, labeled, all within seconds. Approximately 250 cases of wine can be bottled in an hour. Now that you have observed the process of making wine, we hope this intensifies and makes the whole experience of tasting wine even more enjoyable. Cheers!